Okay, everyone, welcome back. We have about maybe a little less than 2 minutes, and then we'll be rolling for our Monday meeting. But good morning and welcome back. 1 second, let me get myself a little drink. Hello, Sky. Just a few moments until we're ready to go. Hi, Kylie. Peachy. Hey, Zoe, Kenna. Welcome back. Okay, guys, it's pretty much class time, so I'm going to let things slowly get started here. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good weekend. So it's Monday, March 1st. Nice to finally be into the spring months, I guess. I really like the change in weather. My birthday's in March, so it's kind of a fun month. Anyway, yeah, so like today what we're going to do is part 2 of our lecture on Emmanuel Kant's ethical philosophy. We started on that last Friday, and we got about halfway through, so we're going to continue on that same topic today. I see all you guys here in the chat, so welcome back. Good to see you. Feel free at any time, as usual, to leave a comment in the chat, and that'll be my way of knowing that you're here for sure. Okay, so let me just start with a little bit of basic review. Peachy, I don't know, are you able to chill, or can you let you lay down? Okay. So yeah, we're looking at the work of this philosopher, Emmanuel Kahn. And let me just clear her from the table really fast. Peach, how about down here? Huh? There you go, girl. Just down there. Okay. So yeah, Emmanuel Kant is our philosopher of the day, and his lifetime spans from 1724 till 1804. In 1785, he wrote a very important book that's considered a major work in philosophy, and that's what we have been reading from him. 1785, the book is called Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals. That's his major volume on what is morality and what's the basis of it and so forth. Sorry, morals. Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, in some translations, groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. But there you have it. This is the author, the lifespan, the date, and the publication title. So ethics is all about morality. One ethical theory was utilitarianism from John Stuart Mill, but a far different system is the one given here by Mr. Emmanuel Kahn. Now, in utilitarian ethics, we were told that the right thing to do is whatever generates the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. That was a consequentialist ethical system, which says focus on the after effects, the results that come from your actions, and that will define the morality of the action. So if the consequences are good or bad, then that will determine whether the act was morally right or wrong. But now Kant says it's not about the consequences at all. So Kant's ethical system, Kantian ethics, it says instead that we should direct our attention to the intention or the will that the person had when they committed the act. So I drew you a little like diagram where in one version of it, there is an arrow pointing ahead to the consequences. In a consequentialist system, those consequences are all that matter to the morality. But from Kant's perspective, it's the intention that the person had when they did the act that matters. So we would instead look at that, which is something that, of course, happens before the results that apply later. I gave you an example to show the main differences of, like, say, a person trying to help a stranded motorist off to the side of the road. And I told you in the scenario to imagine that the person had inadvertently, by repositioning their body, caused them to suffer a worse spinal injury. So if they had just left the person there and never even been on the scene, then that individual would have had full motor control for the rest of their life. But because of the well-intended but ultimately foolish decision to move them, they've now lost that motor control from the neck down. So from a utilitarian point of view, this would have been the wrong action because the consequences were not good. And they don't make anyone happy, and quite the contrary. But from a Kantian perspective, this was not a wrong action because although the consequences, the results were not so favorable to anybody, the intention was good and righteous. So we only look at the will and the intent behind the action itself, not the consequences that come later in a Kantian ethical framework. From there, I tried to explain to you guys an important idea of Kant's, which is that it is only the goodwill that is unconditionally good. He says it's the only thing in the world that's unconditionally good, and that other things which we typically think of as like positive character traits, things like intelligence or dedication or being brave, those other oftentimes good qualities can also be bad if the person who possesses them has a bad will or bad intentions. So like, do you really want somebody who's stalking you to be the most intelligent person in the world? No, because then they're going to be more capable and effective at getting to their goal if they have an evil goal or an evil ambition. So intelligence in the wrong hands can be an enhancement to the person's dangerousness and harm. So intelligence, etc., are not claimed to be unconditionally good. Only the goodwill is. The goodwill is seen, he says, when you try to act from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law. So when you act from a sense of duty to uphold the moral law, you're acting with a goodwill, and from that point on, whatever the consequences are, whether they're good, bad, or in between, they don't matter, they don't affect the morality of the action, because we only assess it based on the nature of the person's will when they commit the act. Okay, so after that, I started to tell you guys about an important claim of Kant, that only the goodwill, only an act done from the motive of duty has moral worth, but an act done from the motive of inclination lacks moral worth. So I want us to return to that point because we haven't yet covered the shopkeeper example of Kant, and I think that's where we left off last time. So the current point that we're explaining in Kant's philosophy is this one. Only an act done from the motive of duty has moral worth. And on the other hand, an act done from the motive of inclination has no moral worth. Okay, so this is the statement, and we are going to try and explain it by means of this example given, the shopkeeper example or scenario. Okay, so let me help you guys understand this so-called shopkeeper example. But before I do that, let's quickly attend to this term inclination. I don't know if we spoke about that last time. If we did, then it'll come back into your memory very fast. But if not, maybe someone else can tell me, what do you think is an inclination? What does the word inclination mean? If I say I have an inclination to go on a run today, or have an inclination to like buy a PlayStation 5 this summer, yes, correct. It's a desire. It's a desire. It's something that you want or that you would like, want to pursue out of self-interest. So an inclination is just something that you desire or want for yourself for whatever reason. Now, what it's saying then is this: only when you do an act strictly because it's duty that requires you to do it, only then does the action have moral worth. If, on the other hand, you do the action just because you desire to do it, you have a self-interested desire to do it, then it doesn't have moral worth. Now let's look at the shopkeeper example to explain this. Okay, so I want you to imagine that there's a person who owns and operates like a little shop, like the equivalent of a convenience store type of little liquor store or something, okay? Now, in comes a little kid to buy something from this shop. And we're talking about a very young child, elementary school age. And this child, let's suppose, asks for the price of a given item. And he goes up to the counter. Let's say it's a candy bar. So he walks to the shopkeeper who's working the desk, the register. And he says, "Excuse me, sir," or "Ma'am," whatever, "how much is this?" It's a candy bar. So now let's put ourselves in the headspace of our shopkeeper. The shopkeeper is thinking this thought. Okay, this kid's asking me how much is this candy bar. Obviously, he doesn't know the price. And he's so young and inexperienced, naive, that I could pretty much tell him whatever price I want, and he would not ask questions, and he would pay it. So I could basically rip him off a little. I could inflate the price, gouge it, and charge him more than what other customers would pay for that item. So suppose that the retail value of the candy bar is like $1, but this guy, he's extremely tempted by the possibility of telling the child a higher number. So he could say $3 or whatever, and the kid would just hand over his money and leave. So our shopkeeper is thinking about that. He's thinking, I kind of would like to have a little extra money. Maybe I could buy another lottery ticket or have some bus money or whatever. So he's hugely interested in ripping the kid off, and he's tempted by this prospect. But just as he's about to say something like that, that's $3 or whatever, another thought occurs to him, and it's this thought. Even though I feel like doing that, and I really, really badly want to rip him off, I recognize that would be not fair, that would be immoral, that would be unjust. And so, even though I want to rip him off, it's not the right thing to do. So after struggling and deliberating over it a little bit and having that internal, back and forth, he finally says to the kid, "Okay, sorry, I was just thinking about something for a minute. You asked how much the candy bar costs? Whatever, okay, it's $1. That's how much it costs." Kid is like, "Why do you seem so exasperated and disappointed? But anyway, here's $1, thanks." And he buys it and he leaves. Okay, so transaction is over. Just consider how that case played out. The guy wanted to rip the kid off. He knew he had a golden opportunity to do it, stealing candy from a baby, like they say, except I guess in this case, giving candy and taking money. But anyway, he sees he's got that opportunity, and he could do it, but he forces himself to do the right thing in the end, just because he knows that that's what would be right, okay? Now, let me change the case slightly, all right? Take another example. Same kind of setup where there's a shopkeeper working the shop, working the register, and a kid walks in, and he asks the same question to the shopkeeper: "How much is this candy bar?" that he presents to the worker. Now, suppose that the guy at the desk says this is what he thinks. Different shopkeeper, shopkeeper number 2. He's got a whole different mental attitude, and he thinks these thoughts. "Oh, how much is that? Well, I can't wait to tell you, kid, it's $1. It's $1 for me, you, or anybody else. That's basic fairness, and I just love fairness, and I love children. And, a lot of shopkeepers out there would rip these kids off like you, but I would never do that because it fills me with such joy, and it's kind of almost like a euphoric experience being fair to children." So with no hesitation, right, and with full joy and like big beaming smile, the second guy says, "It's $1." Okay, now, look at the two cases and compare them really fast. Shopkeeper 1 versus shopkeeper 2. Did they both give the fair price? Yes. So that much is the same. They both gave that same $1 fair retail price of the item. But let's ask now, whose motive was duty and whose was inclination? Between our two subjects, the first one, who really, really did not feel at all like giving the fair price, but made himself do it in the end as an act of will, kind of. Would you say the first person, was his motive duty or inclination? Was he inclined to give the fair price? Or did he do it just because it was his duty? That's the question. What was the motive to give the fair price for the first shopkeeper? Was it based on his personal desire to be fair? Or was it based on recognition of his duty? That's the question. Shopkeeper 1. If you follow the scenario, then you can tell me. What was the motivation of shopkeeper 1? It's either duty or inclination, so let me know which one. Correct, Cordy, it was duty. Because if we ask, well, what was he inclined to do, the first shopkeeper? Like, what did he personally want to do? He definitely didn't want to give the fair price. He wanted the just opposite. He wanted to give the unfair, inflated price. That's what his inclination was. So did he act with his inclinations? No. He said, my inclinations here are trying to get me to do something wrong, so I have to go against my inclinations. So against his contrary inclination, he forces himself to do what duty requires. And that was just based on duty alone. He didn't do it because it felt good. He didn't do it because it made a smile go to his face or happiness or anything else. Quite the contrary, he's bummed out that he didn't get the extra money. He might even feel disappointed afterwards that he didn't get the extra money. So he's not happy about it. It didn't make anyone happy in his case, but he knew that it was his right duty, so he did it. Now in the second version, the second shopkeeper, he gave the fair price too. But can we understand that his motive was not the same? His motive was inclination, because he feels good about it, it makes him happy, and therefore he did it out of love instead of just out of principle. But the thing is, according to Kant, whose action has moral worth? First one or the second one? Well, it's the first one, because it was done strictly from duty's sake alone and not mixed with any inclination or desire. Now, I know that you hear that and you might be thinking, isn't that a little weird though? Because the second guy seems like so much nicer, because he feels good about doing the right thing and he doesn't have to force himself to do it. It just feels good already. Well, what Kant is really saying here is that, I've had to think about this a lot because I've studied it and taught it so many times. And it's oftentimes something I have to explain to students. Like, why is it that the first individual's act is the one we would award moral credit or value to? It's because that first person, they're doing it on a moral basis. They're not doing it because it feels good. When you think of who should really receive moral praise or credit for doing a good thing, is it the person who does it because they already want to do it and it just feels good? Or is it the person who really would have preferred not to do it, but they forced themselves to do it just because they knew that it was what morality required? We would say that that's the type of individual who deserves moral praise. In the other case, the action is its own reward and it doesn't require a moral praise. So I'll give you another example to kind of make the same point. Suppose you have two people who are both going on an identical running routine every morning. So they both wake up and they do the 3-mile run each day, like everyday daily runners, something that I try to do myself. But anyway, take these two people. Person number one, when they wake up, they just hate the idea that they're about to go out and run. In fact, they hate running. They hate the experience. They find it not pleasant at all. They don't like the sweat. They don't like the exertion, the soreness, etc. So for them, it's the least pleasant activity they can think of, but they're doing it. Why are they doing it if they don't like it? Because they recognize some kind of duty to their health and well-being. They think that because my health and my fitness requires physical activity and exercise, I'm going to get it in, even though I don't enjoy it. So they get up and go through the motions. It's quite a struggle to overcome their disinclination, but they're still doing it. Now take another person, and they wake up and they do the same exact 3 miles daily, but they have a whole different mental perspective on it. They love the experience. They love the running. They love the sweat. They're out there with a big smile the whole time, just full of chipper, positive energy, because this is their favorite thing to do, and it's like what they would do even if it didn't have any health benefits. So to the two people here that are both going on a run, which one of them would you say, hey, you know what, pat on the back, good on you. Good on you for doing this run routine. You're doing a good job. You deserve praise for it. Well, it would be the person for whom it is difficult, right? Because they have to overcome their contrary inclinations to hold themselves to the standard. Whereas in the other person's case, it's not that they're doing anything wrong or immoral, but it's just amoral. There's no moral basis to their decision because they do it since it's pleasurable and fun. So in that way, you can hopefully see that with our two shopkeepers, the one who does not desire to be fair is the one who's actually acting based on principle alone, and it's not mixed together with self-interest, desire, or inclination. Maybe one last example to make the point perfectly clear again. Suppose you have two people on an identical, very strict and restrictive diet, like a Tom Brady type of diet. No sugar, no fatty foods, controlled portions, and so this one person, let's say, hates this diet. They're like, this is the worst, most boring, bland diet. I hate just eating constant, greens and macrobiotic stuff. I wish I could get out of this diet, but, the thing is, I know it's healthy and I'm trying to get my health going. So I'm going to hold to it just on the principle that it's healthy, not because I enjoy it. Now take another person and they're on the same diet, but they have a much different palate and they're just into that food. They hate fatty foods. They hate salty foods, fried foods, sweets. And to them, all that stuff is just gross and disgusting. So the Tom Brady diet for person number two, it's actually like their favorite food. If they could just choose anything in the world to eat, that they love more than anything, that they enjoy more than anything, they would just pick this diet. So out of those two people, who would you give praise and credit to, pat on the back for sticking to a diet? Well, it would be the first person who hates doing it, and they're forcing themselves to do it out of the recognition that it's healthy and good. The second person, you wouldn't say, why would you go up to someone eating their favorite meal and be like, you know what, good job, you are eating your favorite meal that you enjoy more than anything else, so credit to you. That's not moral credit, because it doesn't take any difficulty for a person to do it if it pleases them. Okay, so now I can read the words of Kant, and maybe it'll make a little more relatable sense now. He says it here on page 107. He says, so for example, I'll go a bit behind that. He says, I set aside actions which are in accordance with duty, yet to which men have no immediate inclination, but perform them because they are impelled by some other inclination. For in this case, to decide whether the action which accords with duty has been done from duty or from some selfish purpose is easy. The difference is more difficult to note in a case where the action accords with duty and the subject has in addition an inclination to do it. For example, now we get the case. For example, that a dealer should not overcharge an inexperienced purchaser certainly accords with duty. And where there is much commerce, the prudent merchant does not overcharge, but keeps to a fixed price for everyone in general, so that a child may buy from him just as well as everyone else may. Thus, customers are honestly served. But this is not nearly enough for making us believe that the merchant has acted this way from duty and from principles of honesty. His own advantage may require him to do it. And he cannot, however, be assumed to have in addition an immediate inclination towards the buyer, causing him, as it were, out of love to give no one, as far as price is concerned, any advantage over another. Then the action was done neither from duty nor from inclination, but merely for a selfish purpose. So we can imagine that the shopkeeper gives the fair price because he's worried about, what if it's discovered that I ripped off a kid and then Yelp reviews come out and that undermines my business. In that case, again, it would not necessarily be doing the right thing merely for the sake of principle, but because of the self-advantage that comes from not undermining the profitability of your business if the lie is discovered more broadly by the consumer public. So the pure case of acting with duty is when you have no inclination to do the action, and in fact, a contrary inclination to do what duty requires. But you hold yourself fast to the action nonetheless, merely because it is right and not because it is to your advantage or because it makes you feel good. Okay, so then what we've said of Kant so far is that you should act with a good will and a good intent, and this matters all. This is 100% the basis of ethics. It has nothing to do with consequences. The consequences could play out favorably, unfavorably, or anything, but as long as the will was good, then the action is not wrong. You act with a good will when you act from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law. He says the good will is the only thing unconditionally good in the world, as contrasted with other qualities that can be used for bad purposes. And he says that it's only an act done from the motive of duty that has moral worth. If it's done from inclination, it has no moral worth. Consider the shopkeeper example. Okay, so the next big question that's hanging over this whole discussion of Kant, and that we've saved for the end, is what's the moral law, though? I'll write up this point again on the board because it's so important to Kant and his philosophy. Sorry, Peachy. Why don't you just go right here? Okay. So you act with a good will when you act from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law. So this little part at the end, that's what we have to now really look at. Sorry, let me move Peachy here. You act with a good will when you act from the motive of duty to uphold the moral law. So that's what we should be doing if we want to live according to the Kantian ethical framework. But this big question remains, what's the moral law, though? And how can we discover what the moral law is so that we can act from a sense of duty to uphold it? Okay, so Kant does believe there is a moral law, that there's an objective, universal moral code or law. And this is something that I say, according to Kant, is objective and universal. That means that it's not something that's relative at all. It's not something that changes from culture to culture, person to person, place to place, time to time. There's one objective and universal code of ethics. And he says, how can we discover this moral law? By using human reason, by using the power of reason that we have got in our intellect. Now, reason, where does it come from? One possibility is that it comes from God, that it's God-given, that he created us in his image, as it says in the Bible, that he created man in his image with knowledge of good and evil. And so it could be that reason comes from a higher source like God. Another possibility for those that are not so religious could be that it is something that is naturally evolved through a long process of evolution. But whether endowed on us by God or by nature, we have reason. That's clearly what it is to be human. That's the reason that I can talk to you through language, that we can use these technologies, that we can invent all of the amazing different kind of modern conveniences that we have. That we have history, literature, all the academic subjects. That's why we're the higher animal. Okay, so we have reason, and he says if we tap into reason, it can reveal to us what the moral law is and what it forbids us from doing and what it commands us to do. She's always going after the alligator. I got to stop wearing these Lacoste. But anyway, okay. So when we use our God-given or naturally evolved reason to discover morality, he says we'll do it by means of this principle, which he calls the categorical imperative. So to learn what the moral law is and how reason discovers it, we get pushed to this next point called the categorical imperative. So that's what we're going to talk about now. Yeah, Peachy's been very active, guys. Sorry about that, but it's okay. So the categorical imperative. Okay, so the categorical imperative is a principle that he says reason can use to discover what the moral law commands or forbids in any given case. And there are two versions of it. So we're going to have to learn about both versions. Here's version 1. I'll label V1. Version 1 of the categorical imperative says this. Now, just to be clear, on first glance, it's going to perhaps look a little confusing because it uses some technical terms, but I'll clarify those, and by the time we're done, it'll make good sense. So here, bear with me, it says, act always so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. Peachy. Categorical imperative version 1. Act always so that the maxim which describes your action could be willed to be a universal law. So to really get into this, we're going to have to break down a few of the terms found within. Like, what is a maxim? And what does it mean for a maxim to be able to be willed to be a universal law? Okay, so starting off with this word maxim, it's a piece of terminology in Kant's philosophy. And what a maxim is basically this. It's a person's individual principle of action. It's kind of like your personal policy statement of what you do under what type of circumstances. So in general, a maxim can take a form. Here's like the format of a maxim. Okay, so I'm going to erase the top. And just so that you know that that heading is for this categorical imperative, version 1 right here. So here's the form of a maxim. It's a principle something like this. It says, I will do, and then it lists an action. So for the purposes of generality, I'll put it this way. I will do X, which is some action, in certain circumstances. And so I will label this given circumstances with the letter C to generally stand for whatever the relevant circumstances might be. Now, for every intentional action that a human being ever commits, meaning something that you do on purpose of your own free will, deliberately on purpose, any such action, there is a maxim associated with it. And that would just be a statement of what you are doing and what the circumstances are which have led you to do that, okay? Or the circumstances in which you would do that. So to kind of give you an example to think about, let's work off of your current case right now. So right now what you're doing is watching a YouTube live lecture. So you've done it on purpose of your own free will. So you have a maxim. The beginning of this maxim will be easy enough. I will attend lecture. Now, what is your policy of attendance? I'm not speaking about my policy, but you, the student. Like, under what circumstances do you determine that you will attend such a lecture as this? It doesn't have to be the most noble or virtuous. You could just say very practical minded. I will go to lecture in what circumstances? I'm trying to see if you've done something wrong or if it's okay what you've done today by attending the lecture. So we're going to run it through the categorical imperative. First, we have to find out the maxim, though. And so the beginning is just what you do. The second part is under what circumstances. So you say, Dennis, if our attendance is graded or mandatory, perhaps I would look at it this way, you know, because probably, I mean, that's a bit of, that's almost a little too cynical, because what you're basically saying is if it's not graded and if it's given to me as an option, then my choice would be to not go, which might not be moral, because if everybody's decision was to only go when it was absolutely being recorded, then so many people would miss out on lectures that we wouldn't have effective transmission of content from the professors to the students for the next generation to learn the material from the previous. So I would put it this way, maybe a little bit more virtuous. I will attend lecture if I can and if it is in session. That's not too virtuous either, because I'm not saying to learn, to be the wise person that I want to be or whatever, to fully realize myself. So I'm making it a little minimal. I will go to class simply when I'm able to, meaning like I'm not physically or otherwise incapable of it, and it is in session. So I think that at least describes probably many of your choice this morning. You're here at this lecture. Why? Because you're able to be, and because this is the scheduled time for the lecture. Okay, now, what this says is once you've identified a maxim, consider what it would be like if that was a universal law. So the conversion of a maxim into a universal law requires us to give the form of the universal law statement. So the universal law version of the maxim is just going to be down here, universal law. All people will do X in those circumstances. In circumstances C. Okay, so you have to consider what would be the case if your individual maxim were elevated to the status of a universal law. If this universal law were binding on all people, 100% of people who find themselves in the same situation. So, for example, your attendance this morning could be based on this maxim. I will go to class in case it is scheduled and I'm able to be there. As a universal law, that would become the principle that all people will go to class if class is in session and they're capable of being there. Now, if that was a universal law, basically there would be no problem with that. It would just mean that people go to their duly scheduled classes when they're capable of being there. And that would not be at all something that would be contradictory, nor would it be undesirable. So in this case, I guess we can say that that maxim passes the bar, and it's not a violation of the moral law to do that. So the first version of the categorical imperative asks you to consider what your maxim is each time you do something intentional. Then imagine this maxim as a universal law, and then you get this simple question. Is it possible for everybody to act that way? And is it desirable for everybody to act that way? If it's either not possible or undesirable for everybody to act on the basis of your maxim in the same circumstances, then that is a violation of the moral law. So the more interesting examples to use to understand this, sorry, someone's, I guess, a package that has come for me, hold on. Anyway, I'm not even sure what it is. Something from Verizon. I just got a new phone, so I guess something from the mail. Anyways, guys, sorry to disturb the flow of lecture, but what I was trying to say is that when you have a maxim, the categorical imperative asks you to consider elevating it to the status of universal law. If it's not possible for everybody to act that way, then it's wrong. And if it's technically possible for everybody to act that way, but it's not desirable, then it's also wrong and you shouldn't do it. So now let me give you some examples of actions which fail this test, and then you'll see what kind of actions are ruled out and forbidden by the moral law. Suppose there's a long line, right? And you're waiting in the long line. And you know, when it's a long line and you're somewhere towards the back, you can feel impatient. You can feel like, I hate waiting in this line. I wish it was moving faster or that I was closer to the front. So imagine you've got a person like that in this line, and they're getting a little annoyed with how long it is. So they think of doing something like cutting the line, okay? So we've got the cutter. Now let's take the maxim of the cutter. What's their maxim? I will cut in line under what circumstances? Just put yourself in that headspace. It's nothing too, sophisticated. Just what would be the maxim statement of the cutter? I will cut. That's the X part. What is C? The cutter cuts when what? In what case? In what circumstance? Let me know. When does the cutting happen? Yeah, when the line is long. Okay, good. When the line is long. So let that be our maxim of our given case. I will cut in line when it's a long line. Now, if that's a universal law, okay, let's just put ourselves in the hypothetical world where that is the universal rule, not the exception, but the rule. In that case, all people will cut when there's a line. So ask yourself, what happens if 100% of people all cut the line? Does that work? Does that work to anybody's advantage? No, because is there even a line anymore if everybody cuts the so-called line? No, at that point, there's just a mob of people all trying to cram towards the front where the entrance is. Also, if everybody cut and that was a universal rule, then what would happen when the cutter cut ahead of some people and got further ahead in the line? If he cuts and everybody else does too, then what happens to his position in the line once he cuts and gets closer to the front? Let me just know about that, if you follow my question. Like, if everybody were to cut, then take our one cutter. He's moved forward by cutting, but since everybody does the same thing, then what happens? Like, imagine everybody does the same thing. So then basically what happens to his new position in the line? Yeah, well, he would gain no advantage in terms of position in the line because as he cuts, all the other people cut him again. So the cutter gets cut. So look, the cutter, him or herself or them, what does this person want? Do they want everybody to cut? No. In fact, to the contrary, they want everybody, except for them, to obey the rules of staying in their position in the single file of the line. Because if everybody does what they're doing, it no longer works to their advantage. They can only gain an advantage over all the other rule followers if they all follow the rule while the one person breaks it. But if everybody systematically operates according to the same principles, then neither could there be a line, nor could there be any value in advancing forward in a line if it's full of 100% cutters. So if you really look at it, the cutter knows that what they're doing cannot be made universal, and they would not even want it to be universal, because if it was, it would undermine the entire effectiveness of their chosen action. So what Kant is telling you then is, reason has revealed to you that this is wrong, this is out of bounds, this is a violation of the moral law, because it's based on an action, it's based on a maxim that cannot be universalized. It either is impossible for it to be universalized or it's too undesirable for it to be willed as a universal law. So this is wrong. And it's your own reason that is telling you that. So if you think about your action and you recognize this is something that not everybody could do and it still work or even be desired, then you know you're doing something wrong. So beneath the somewhat sophisticated presentation of the principle, it really is saying something straightforward, which is it's only morally acceptable to do things that it's possible for everybody to also do. So if you're ever creating an exception to the rule for yourself, doing something where you recognize it would not be okay for everybody to do this, or it would not even be possible for everybody to do this, reason is telling you right then and there, wherever you got reason from, it's telling you you're about to do something or you're contemplating doing a wrong action. It's not okay to do things that couldn't work if they were done universally. It is only okay to do things that would be possible for everybody to also do. So I can give you further examples that also show the violation of this first version of the categorical imperative. Suppose you have a person that wants to take a free ride, like the free rider of the subway. So when there's a toll to be paid, they jump right over the turnstile and walk onto the transportation system for free, even though other patrons are paying. Okay, so what's this person's maxim? I will take a free ride on the subway whenever I want to ride. Okay, I will not pay the toll when I want to ride the subway. If that's the universal law, then it is this principle or law. All people will decline to pay when they ride the subway. Now, if everybody does that, then it eliminates the mechanism of funding for the subway to operate. And then there would no longer be a subway for the free rider to ride for free. So although the free rider wants to take a free ride, they don't want everybody to do it. In fact, they want other people aside from them to pay the fees and dues so that the function of the system will persist. They know very full well that it would not be capable of continuing to function if everybody acted systematically to ride for free. So you know it's wrong when you ride for free because it's not possible for everybody to do it alike. And there again, it's wrong action revealed as such by reason given the presentation of the categorical imperative. One more example, and then I'll move to the second version of this categorical imperative. And this is one that Kant talks about himself in the book, so it's helpful to refer to it. He says, imagine that somebody would like to request a loan from somebody to get extra money, but this person requesting the loan has zero intention of actually paying it back. They just want the money, and then they just want to keep it with no repayment. But they know this, the person will never give them the money in the first place unless they make a promise, at least initially, of repayment. So they set their mind to do this. I will lie about repayment. I will make a false promise to repay so that they will give me that money. Okay, so what would be the maxim here? I will lie about repaying on loans whenever I want some money through a loan. Now, if that was the universal law, then who would lie about their desire or ability to repay when they requested loans? It would be everybody who ever requested loans. If it's a universal law, then all people who request loans will not pay them back, or will promise to pay them back, but still will not do it. So if that was the case, then would these loans be issued anymore? No, because lenders would know that universally, all those that request such loans lie about their intended repayments. And so if that was the universal rule, it would be known by those who are being asked for loans, and then loans would no longer be given. So what the false promiser wants is for most of those who do request loans to be truthful in their intention and commitment to repay, so that their present lie can escape undetected as a case of telling the truth. Only against the presumption of truth-telling in such situations will the lie be believed in the first place. So if everybody were to lie in the same way as a universal law, then they could no longer even achieve the function of making this lie. And by the way, the loans wouldn't even exist either, because who would give loans if they knew that everybody always defaulted on them? So here's what he says about that on page 109 on the right column. He says, a man finds himself forced to borrow money. He knows well that he won't be able to repay it, but he sees also that he will not get any loan unless he firmly promises to repay it within a fixed time. He wants to make such a promise, but he still has conscience enough to ask himself whether it is not permissible and is contrary to his duty to get out of difficulty in this way. Suppose, however, that he does decide to do that. The maxim of his action would then be expressed as follows. When I believe myself to be in need of money, I will borrow money and promise to pay it back, although I will not do so. Now, this principle of self-love or personal advantage may perhaps be quite compatible with his welfare, but the question now is whether it is morally right. I will then transform the requirement into a universal law and put the question thus: how would things stand if my maxim were to become a universal law? He then sees at once that such a maxim could never hold as a universal law of nature and be consistent, but must necessarily be self-contradictory, because the universality of a law which says that anyone believing himself to be in difficulty could promise whatever he wants with the intention of not keeping it would make the promising itself and the goal to be achieved by it totally impossible, insofar as no one would believe what was promised, but would merely laugh at all such statements as being vain falsehoods. So once again, a case is given in which we see a person acting on a maxim that's a bad maxim because it could not be universalized without contradiction or without undesirable effects, even for the one who would act that way. So simply stated, when you're out here in the world trying to do the right thing, Kant asks you to consider your principle of action, imagine it were to become a universal law, and then simply consider, would that be possible or undesirable? And if it could be possible and not undesirable, then it's an okay thing to do. But if the answer to either of those things is no, then that's wrong, immoral, and you shouldn't be doing it. And it violates the moral law. Now, there's a second version of the categorical imperative too. And, it's good news is it's a little even simpler than the first one. So the first one about maxims and universal laws, a little more complex. This second version, version 2, is relatively more straightforward. So the second version of categorical imperative basically just says this. It says when you are interacting with other human beings, another one of us, right? Human beings, members of the human race, like we are. You're not ever supposed to treat a human being as a means to an end, but always treat human beings as ends in themselves. So that's what it says. Never treat another human being as a means to an end. Always, on the other hand, always treat human beings as ends in themselves. Okay, so never treat another human being as a means to an end, but always treat human beings as ends in themselves. So for us to focus ourselves on this second version of the categorical imperative, we have to kind of take a step back for a moment and remember some words that we've used earlier in the class. Means and ends. These were discussed when we lectured on John Stuart Mill and his utilitarian ethics. At one point he said, happiness is the only thing that human beings pursue as an end and not as a means. So tapping into that knowledge about means and ends, let's remind ourselves, what is an end and what are means in relation to that? Someone can tell me. And that will help us break this down and expand upon it. So let me know, what is an end? And also, what are means then? Yeah. Let me know. What's the case about means and ends? Okay, so I'm seeing it here. An end is a goal or an objective. That's correct, Sydney. And means are actions that are taken to get to the goals. Yes. So now, given that, here's what this is saying. When you're interacting with other human beings, people, we're not talking about animals or inanimate objects or just, debris, but when you are dealing with other human beings like yourself, then what you owe them is never to treat them as though they were simply a means to an end. In other words, don't treat people as though they were tools or instruments to be used in the pursuit of some goals that you have, which maybe they don't share with you. You're not supposed to treat people as instruments to manipulate towards your goals. You're supposed to treat other human beings like they are the goal, for the sake of which you are acting itself. So people are not objects, they're subjects. And that means that they do demand and deserve a degree of rational respect for their rationality, for their humanity. So the second version of the categorical imperative says you're commanded and obligated to respect humanity, meaning you're not supposed to treat human beings as a means. Now, I can give you some various examples to make the point, I hope, vivid. Some of these will be kind of out there, but, just to make the point clear. Suppose that there was like a horrifying, violent scenario unfolding around you somewhere in a public place, like a mass shooting. And, everyone then, because this is happening, is scattering, running, trying to head for safety and cover. Suppose as that's all breaking out and you're trying to run away from the scene yourself, another individual who's there present on the scene, who's even bigger and stronger than you and is clearly in a panic, grabs you and holds you fast to the front of their body and moves through the scene like this. I'm trying to describe the person utilizing you as a human shield to block them from incoming bullets, shrapnel, or whatever else, explosive force. So, if they did this to you, I hope you can understand and recognize pretty easy that's wrong. That's not okay. And why not? Well, looking at it through the lens of Kantian philosophy, in that case, the person is using you as a human shield, therefore as a means to an end. What is the end? Well, in their case, the end being pursued is their own safety and survival. But they're putting your body to use as a means to that goal. And the thing is, you're a human being, you're a subject, you're not an object to be used as just a barrier towards the preservation of that other person's safety. Now, if I wanted to use a table like this a chair, a shield, an inanimate object, that I can use as a means to whatever end, because it has no will of its own, it has no rationality, it has no knowledge of the moral law itself. But human beings are not things to be disposed of or used in whatever way you deem fit for a purpose that you're pursuing. So you're not supposed to treat people as means, always as goals themselves. Okay, like the person is the goal that you're acting on the basis of, not a means towards an end that you may have. If I stole something from somebody, say I was at a party where there's like a wealthy person hosting it, and I find my way into their trophy room and I'm all by myself. And in this trophy room, I see like a very valuable item that I could easily snatch away and steal. And because of how many people are there, no one would ever know that I took it. Now I'm going to use that item and sell it so I can gain money for myself, and I want that money. In this case, again, I'm violating the categorical imperative. I'm doing something wrong because I'm using that person's property as a means towards my own enrichment through the act of theft. It's not given to me. It's not authorized by means of a willful decision to transfer ownership. It's not a gift. And so in that case, I'm using them as though they're like a human account that I can withdraw from to profit myself. If someone was raped, I mean, a horrifying example, but in the case of rape, someone as sick as it is to imagine is, I guess, pursuing the goal of the sexual pleasure involved in the act. But they're bypassing the person's consent and using their body as a means towards that end. Again, it's a total violation of the categorical imperative. So there was a companion piece to Kant's philosophy that I added for today's lesson, and there was like really only one thing I wanted to say about this woman's writing, Honora O'Neill. She's a modern philosopher who tries to break down and simplify Kant to an everyday audience. And she says the easiest window into Kant's philosophy is to know that the second version of the categorical imperative here is really just saying that you should never and you may never involve another person in an interaction that they would not consent to. So if you're wondering, when do I use someone as a means? You use someone as a means when you involve them in an interaction that they would not or could not consent to. In the case of the human shield, it's involuntary against the person who's seized against their will and used in that way. In the case of theft that I gave, the victim of theft has not chosen to give the item away. That's why it's theft instead of just a gift. In the case of rape, by definition of rape, there's no consent given to the act, and therefore it's, again, not based on consent. Now, if the other person willfully chooses to be serviceable to your end, then two people can be mutually beneficial without any kind of immoral side effects. Like, so, I mean, if I help you with your homework and you help me with something at my job, we both benefit from it. But as long as we both fully and on full information choose our role in interaction, then that's within bounds. If I go to the Starbucks and I buy a coffee and the barista serves me the coffee, that's okay because that employee works at will and they're not held there against their will like a slave. But if I did take a service that benefited me from an actual slave, then I would be violating their choice, and they would be then used as a means towards the end of whatever service that they provide to me. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the Kant. I might just, summarize and say a few summary statements to begin on Wednesday. But for now, I think we're pretty good to go. So we're all caught up more or less with our notes and this calendar of dates. Don't forget that your first essays are due Wednesday. You'll just submit them to me by email to my email account, vulich@chapman.edu, anytime before 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Jasmine, I'm going to get you your email in just a moment. I know you're here, and I intended to get to it before 9 a.m., but I just got kind of a little pressed, so I'll get it done now in the next 30 minutes. Okay, everybody, so if you have no questions for now, then go ahead and just let me know. You can say goodbye, thank you, or anything else, and I'm going to close our stream, and we will be back on Wednesday. Make sure to read the works of Peter Singer and Rich and Poor for Wednesday and Friday's meetings. Okay, guys, thanks again, and take it easy. I'll be in touch, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye.